Hi there. My name is Nicholas, and I am a customer success manager here at Thematic, and I'm filling in. Nathan was not available right now. And today I'm going to be doing a short little webinar about some of the functionalities of Thematic, some of the analytic tools, the functionality, maybe little tips and tricks about how you can find the most interesting insights using the tools, and as well as a little bit of a sneak peek into some of our upcoming features. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And the first thing I'm going to start with is just a little overview of what Thematic is and why these analytic tools, are the way that they are. So Thematic came around from the basic principle that analyzing free text responses is really difficult and really time consuming, especially in there's such a vast quantity as some large businesses tend to. This particular data set we're going to be using as an example is a RIP of airline reviews from TripAdvisor. And I think we collected something like 40,000 free text responses. And these also contained additional bits of information, like what was the score that the review gave the airline, what airline did they fly, when did they fly, what flight class were they in, what flight type, etc. So as you can see here, this is just the raw data, which is just a CSV file with just hundreds and hundreds and thousands of text responses from people giving their feedback about their flight. So the current way of doing this, you might think, is, well, why don't we have one person try to go through and read and understand all of these, and then come back to us and tell us what problems people are having. And one of the problems with this is, for a single person to try and keep track of all of the themes and topics and subjects which people talk about, it eventually just becomes too overwhelming. If you just have to read 100 comments, it's like, okay, you might sort of identify 5 key things that people are talking about. But then if you have to read another 100 and suddenly you discover, oh, there was a 6th thing that I didn't realize was important, then you'd have to go back and read the first 100 and then start noticing the 6th thing to start being able to accurately report it. And this is where Thematic comes into play. And what Thematic is really good at is using an advanced AI system to pick through hundreds and thousands of comments simultaneously and identifying important themes, and then making it super easy to analyze your data and view the themes. So now we're going to hop over to the client, which is hopefully what some of you have seen, and hopefully this is not you guys are not seeing this for the first time. We do have some demos available on our website that you can go and view at any time and have a play for yourself, including this one. I think this one is just called the Airlines demo. So the first tool we're going to look at is the comparison tool, which views all of the themes which Thematic has identified in the data and sorts them by frequency, so how often responses mention them. So as we can see here, the most mentioned theme is good experience, and you can hover over each of these bars to see additional information, like the exact percentage, as well as the volume. You can also click on one of these base themes on the left and view its sub-themes on the right. And sub-themes are more specific, smaller themes, which we've grouped under a bigger base theme to make it easier to sort of categorize and understand things together. For example, just the theme crew is helpful, but it's not as specific as it could be, and it doesn't help you understand specifically what about the crew people are talking about. And so in the subthemes, you can see things like flight attendants, cabin crew, friendliness, gate agent. For good experience, people talk about it's a great flight, or it's a great airline, or if it's smooth or comfortable or reliable. And the other thing that the comparison tool lets you do is you can view comments that have been tagged with the specific theme. So for example, if we wanted to look at only comments which were tagged with great flight, Southwest always has great flights, no complaints. So this is the comparison tool, which is the easiest way to sort of get a quick view of what people are talking about in your data. And so to explain a little bit more about base themes and subthemes, I'm going to show a feature which is I think currently in private beta, but should be coming out to everybody fairly soon, is what we call the themes editor. And soon this will be available within the client. It'll be in part of the dropdown that everyone can see. And this lets you view the base themes and subthemes that Thematic identified in your data, and allows you to modify them to make little changes to improve them for you, for your context, for what your people talk about most often and how you'd like things organized. As an example, we can look at the base theme, good experience, and we can see here the sub-themes which have been put into it, as well as other themes which have been merged, which is when you take two themes and put them together under one. So under good experience, it's also things like love flying, pretty good, great time. The other things that the theme editor lets you view is the mapped phrases. And so this is the specific combinations of words which the Thematic AI has identified as meaning the particular thing. So because when you have access to the themes editor, you can add specific new mapped phrases, or you can delete ones that currently exist. So the Thematic AI is not perfect, and it will make the occasional strange thing that doesn't quite make sense. And so using the theme editor, you're able to go in and view specifically why did this comment end up being tagged with this theme? And if it wasn't accurate, you can make the changes yourself. So that's the theme editor, which will be coming soon, which we're very excited to get into the hands of everybody. One of the things that's super helpful with the theme editor we've found is that the themes themselves may be accurate, but the names are not very useful. As an example, something like user experience. Very few people, when they write a review, will use keywords like user experience or things like that. But when you're reporting on reviews, you sort of want to group everyone who talks about the user experience under one category. So in this case, people might talk about the confusing buttons or unclickable buttons or something. And you can just rename one of the themes to be user experience, but have it still talk about the actual issues which people are mentioning. Let's go to the next. Let's go to another tool now. Let's go to themes, which is another view of all the themes which Thematic has identified in the data. And this one groups them, instead of in a bar graph by frequency, groups them in a word cloud, so you can see which ones are being mentioned most frequently. Thematic is also able to calculate some sentiment about themes, whether people are saying sort of emotionally positive things or emotionally negative things about themes. And you can see by the colors here about whether a theme is more positive or more negative. And so you can mouse over any of the themes and see the counts of specific sub-themes as well. And this one also has a comments related to on the right, which can be helpful to get a better understanding. And you're able to scroll all the way to the bottom. It should load 15 by default, and if you click load more, it will load another 15. So now we're going to go to probably one of the most valuable and most interesting analytic tools, which is called Impact. And Impact is available if your data contains some sort of score. So whether that's an NPS score or a customer satisfaction score or a 1 to 5 star rating, or potentially you could match it with any other sort of metric. So something like repeat purchases, value of purchases, something like that. And so what the impact graph does is it compares each of the themes, all of the comments that were tagged with the theme, the score of those comments, and it compares it with the average score. And it's able to tell you, because of comments that were tagged with a particular theme, is my average score higher or lower? Or for NPS, like, is my NPS score higher because of comments mentioning this theme, or lower because of comments mentioning this theme? So airlines, I believe they were asked to give a rating between 1 to 5, and we've multiplied it by 10, so from 10 to 50, basically, to give a more visible and easily understood impact score. And so we can see here that the biggest positive impactor on score is good experience, which is 3.4 points. So because of those 15,000 comments which mention good experience, their average score is 3.4 points higher. And the biggest negative one is flight timeliness at minus 1.4 points. And what's really interesting about the impact graph is it gives you an extra perspective on what people are actually talking about versus what actually matters to them. For example, if we hop over to the comparison, we can see that good experience is the most mentioned theme. So it would be a fairly safe assumption that this has sort of, a big impact on your score. But flight timeliness is actually is the fifth most mentioned theme, but it does have the biggest negative impact. For example, like much bigger than pricing. Like if we try to find pricing here, yeah, pricing does not at all have a big impact, despite being one of the most frequently mentioned themes. And so an insight you could draw from this is that price doesn't really push the average review score higher or lower when people either praise or complain about the price. But flight timeliness, and if we look into the subthemes, we can get sort of a more understanding of what flight timeliness is actually about. We can see things like flight delays, and if their flight is an hour late or a minute late, or they have to wait for an hour. These are the things that are having the biggest impact on score. So if I was in charge of all these particular airlines and I wanted to try and improve my average score the highest, I could first look at the comparison to see, okay, what are people talking about the most frequently? And then check the impact graph to see, okay, well, which of these themes is actually having a negative impact on my score, and how can we improve that? So flight timeliness is an interesting theme. So we're going to select it, and we're going to hop over to another tool now called theme analysis. And theme analysis lets you focus on either a specific base theme or one of its subthemes, and you can view its total frequency in your data set. If you do have locations available in your data, you can also see where in the world the responses were that are mentioning this theme. And if we scroll to the two graphs here, which are always very interesting to view, we can look at the theme's frequency or volume over time, and we can also compare its impact over time. So volume over time will work if you have dates in your data. So this could be quarterly, it could be weekly, it could be monthly. For this airlines demo, I believe it's month. We've set it up for monthly. And so you're able to notice over time sort of trends of when people are mentioning a theme more frequently or less frequently. And then you're able to compare that with, did it have a more positive impact? Did it have a more negative impact? For example, we can see here that there was a slight dip in people mentioning it from January to February. But what's actually really meaningful here is that the negative impact on score went from -2 to -1.2. So whatever happened in January, February, people started mentioning it a little less, and it started having less of a negative impact on score. But then we can see that people mentioned it just a little bit more in March, but suddenly it's gone back to -1.6, and then all the way back to -1.9 in April. So whatever sort of big positive change might have happened from January to February clearly got worse going into March and then April. So this graph here shows the themes that were mentioned alongside the theme flight timeliness. And this can be really interesting to try and get more of an understanding of what people are talking about when they say flight timeliness. Are they possibly complaining about the price? Are they mentioning price a lot with it as well? Like they didn't get a refund, or they paid good money and they didn't expect their flight to be late? Or were they mentioning the crew? For example, I feel like my flight was late because of the crew, or the crew didn't help me when the flight was late. So we can see here that the most mentioned theme alongside flight timeliness is the crew. So 35% of people who mentioned flight timeliness also mentioned the crew some way or another. And so you can also see things like flight service or pricing or connecting flight. Connecting flight is a big one. Like 20% of people who complain about flight timeliness are also mentioning some sort of connecting flight. And 10% of people who mentioned flight timeliness also mentioned missing a connecting flight. And I'm sure if we checked the impact graph for this one, we can see that it's not just 10%, but it's also having an actual impact on score. So I mentioned earlier that this data also had some additional data, something like what airlines did they fly, what score did they give. And so at the bottom of the themes analysis, you're able to compare a theme's frequency across these different categories. So for example, if we look at flight timeliness across airlines, we can see that American reviews are much more likely to mention it than Southwest reviews. We can also look at something like score, and we can see a strong trend here. The people who give a 1-star review are much more likely to mention flight timeliness than people who give a 5-star review. You can also sort of compare things like Canadian flights, or at least where the flight, I believe that was where the flight arrived. We can see that Canada has a large mention of flight timeliness versus international, not as much. And so with this additional data that comes in the original file is how we're able to make these filters, which you can use to sort of create your segments of your data. So this can be, I'm being slacked. Oops. And so these segments can be used to sort of get a better understanding of specific types of your customers. So for the airlines demo, this could be the different airlines, where they were flying to, or I think what's quite interesting here is the difference between things like first class, economy, or business class. But these filters could cover almost anything. It could be gender, the age, how long they've been your customer. And so all of these can be configured when you start using Thematic by us, and they appear as filters, which are available in all of the analytic tools. So as you can see here in the airlines, you can filter and only view the data from people who gave you a 1-star or 2-star or 3-star, or people who only flew Delta or American or first class. And so this can be really powerful with tools like comparison and impact, as if we start, let's say, let's compare the difference between a 5-star and 1-star, and you're able to apply 2 different filters and then compare them. So the blue here representing the 5-star and the orange representing the 1-star. And so now you're able to really compare the difference in what people are saying. And so, for example, I mean, we can see here, it seems to make sense that 5-star reviews are much more likely to mention a good experience, so something like a great flight or a great airline. But we can see that communication is a much more frequently mentioned theme by 1-star reviews. So something like a phone. So if they mention a phone call or an email, they're much more likely to give you a 1-star review than a 5-star review. I'm going to try another comparison between business class and first class. So one of the things we can see here is seats on the plane, lie flat seats, seat comfort, good seats. And what gets especially interesting here, because we can see, all right, we can see the differences in theme frequency and volume, but what's actually having the biggest difference on the score? So on the impact, you can view the score for each of the segments that you filtered for. And then you're also able to compare the impact to see which themes are affecting which customer segments score the most. So for example, we can see here business class is much more positively affected by flight service than first class. In particular, something like entertainment. When a first class review mentions entertainment, it has a little bit of a negative impact on their score review. But when business class mentions entertainment and flight entertainment, their score actually gets higher because of it. And so this can draw a lot of really interesting insights if you're trying to learn specific things about different customer segments you have. And we're always happy to sort of set up and configure filters for however you wanted. So for example, for this one, it's got their dates set into quarters, but we can set that as a custom date range. So you can pick something like a week or a month or a year. If you have, say for example, you wanted to always compare something like Delta and United, or you wanted to compare everyone except Southwest, we can configure a filter for you to do that. So I want to go a little bit more into some of the functionality of impact, because some of it is in this little options menu here, which is interesting. I'm going to give it a second to load here. So one of the things that you can choose in the impact tool is you can choose whether to view the impact or just the average score of just the comments that have been tagged with the theme. And the key difference between these is that impact does a calculation that also considers the frequency of a theme versus theme score does not. So for example, if we jump over to theme score and we look at something like good experience, interpreting this, we can see that if you take only comments that are tagged with good experience, their average score is 41.9. Something like great staff is 41.7. Loyal customer is 41.2. And this could be interesting to see just like the score of the theme, but it can sometimes also be not quite as valuable as impact because this doesn't consider frequency. So for example, you could look at this and think, oh, 15,000 people are mentioning good experience, and it's got an average score of 41.9 versus, our average score is 35.5. this must have a really big positive impact on our score. Our score must go up a lot because of good experience. But if we look at something like loyal customer, which also has a really high score compared to the average, only 1,378 comments mentioned it, which is like a tenth, slightly like less than a tenth compared to good experience. So while when people mention being a loyal customer or good experience, it has a similar increase in score. The fact is 10 times more people are likely to mention good experience. And so that will be driving up your average score much more than loyal customer. And that's why the impact is probably the most valuable one. Not that theme score can't be interesting, but I think it's really important that you contextualize, the scores with also the frequencies. The really popular example that we use is what's the difference between missing your flight or your flight being canceled? Or rather, what's the difference between your flight being delayed versus actually just straight missing your flight? And in terms of frequency, far few people completely miss their flight compared to people who just have a little bit of a delay. And you would think that if you miss your flight, you're going to leave a much more negative review of the airline, which is true, which we can see with something like the theme score. But what's important to realize is that many, many more flights get delayed rather than completely canceled. And because there's so many more people complaining about delays, and that has not as negative a decrease on score, but a significant decrease on score, it ends up having a bigger impact. So if I was an airline company and I wanted to increase my score the most, and I could either make it so nobody missed a flight ever again, or there were no delays on flight, just from a score perspective, nobody having any more delays in their flights leads to the biggest increase in score. So I want to cover one more tool here, as well as, or two more tools. We're going to do overtime and then correlation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about insights and dashboards, and then finish with a little bit sort of a talk about push reporting, which is our sort of an upcoming feature in the future, which we're looking to sort of beta test and get into hands of people now. Not sure why overtime isn't loading right now. Not sure why it's unhappy. Yeah, I think I timed out. Yeah, Thematic has a 24-hour timeout security thing. So once you log in, it will remember you for 24 hours, and then it will require you to log back in again. So if we hop over to overtime now, there we go. So overtime is sort of an interesting view of themes that's also combined with a score over time graph. So you can use your mouse and hover over a specific time frame and click on it to lock it, so that way it doesn't get changed when you mouse over anything else. And then it shows you a theme cloud for just that time period. So just for June in 2017, we can see that there were 5,800 responses, and then you can see the themes, the most mentioned themes in that time period. It's also able to compare it against the average, and with the little arrows next to a theme tell you whether a theme is more frequently mentioned or less frequently mentioned in this time period compared to the average. So for example, we can see in June more people were mentioning sort of a good experience, but less people were mentioning the crew. And you're able to, there's the options. You're able to change the graph over time to show either weekly or quarterly or monthly, depending on what you're looking to view at. So if you have data which contains like specific days, then something like a weekly view can be valuable. If you've got data that only contains sort of this monthly data, then the monthly view will be most valuable. And if you have data which only has it every quarter, then quarterly can be the most valuable. Previously, Thematic used to have an overtime tool for weekly, for monthly, and quarterly, but now we've been able to shift it to just be in one options drop-down menu. Finally, the correlation tool is sort of a view of the impact that tries to really simplify things. And the correlation calculates for each of the themes how frequently they're mentioned and how important they are to the score. which is sort of what the impact graph does, except this one shows it in sort of different visual way using the quarters. You can hover over each of the dots to see the frequency and the correlation of the theme, and it groups them into whether it's like frequently important, frequently unimportant, infrequently unimportant, or infrequently important. And so ideally, when you're looking for the most meaningful themes that you want to get more details about, you're going to look for things in the top right quarter, the things that are most frequently mentioned that are having the most important impact. So things like good experience, crew, flight service. Okay. So one other thing I want to go to talk about, which I think can definitely be super helpful, is you're able to download your data off of Thematic if you have either an analyst or an admin user account. We'll talk a little bit about admin in a second, about how you can decide which of your users has which of these permissions. But if you're an analyst or an admin, you're able to download your data from Thematic in a format which also contains information about the themes which Thematic has tagged with it, as well as a sentiment. So if, for example, this is data I've downloaded earlier, so you can see each of the comments now has an additional column which has the sentiment as well as the themes that it was tagged with. And so there's a couple options to download data depending on what you'd like. If you want to just download all your data, you can use this little drop down and use the download button here, and this will download the complete set of data. If you want to download a filtered segment of your data, you can apply a filter in a blue filter. So for example, if we just want delta, and then if you hit the, give it a second. Then if you hit the download button, it'll download you all of the delta data. Or if you're looking for just a specific themes data, you can select it. Looks like we've gone to American for some reason. There we go. For example, so if I wanted to download all the comments that got tagged with flight attendant, you go over here with this dropdown and download all comments related to flight attendants. Another cool feature we have is that if you have a specific analytic tool and a set of filters, let's say something like American economy, and we want to compare it with something like United economy. Normally, the way that you could share this with someone if they had an account, or probably the fastest way to share this would just be to take a screenshot, which you can on Mac using Control-Shift-4. Just take a screenshot of the graph and share it with someone. Or if you wanted to send it to somebody who has access to your Thematic, you could copy and send them this link, and then they would have to apply the filters themselves and go to the analytics tool. But what you can do here, which is cool, is we have a copy link, which if you copy and paste it into a browser, and if you're logged into this particular Thematic, it will take you automatically to the particular analytic tool with the filters applied. So for example, if you were looking at impact, it would take you to impact, or if you're looking at comparison, it would take you to comparison. So if we give this a second to load here, we can say it's opened up comparison, and it's already applied our American economy and our United economy filters. Okay, I just want to quickly go over some admin stuff now, as well as uploading data, since it is super quick. You are able to upload your data in the Thematic client. You don't have to email us a CSV or anything. You can safely upload it here. Depending on how many data sets you have, there may be multiple sort of windows here, and not all of your data sets may be accepting data at a particular time. But it's just as simple as clicking and dragging, or clicking to upload and then picking your file and uploading it, and then Thematic receives it. Depending on the complexity of the data file, we will process it as soon as we can to get the new data available in your client. I think our estimate now is roughly 1 to 2 business days, but we try to be in contact with you during this. So if it takes longer, you'll know, and we'll send you an email once your data is available in the client. The other thing that's I just want to walk through now is some of the admin tools you have when it comes to managing your users. So if you're an admin account, you'll have access to managing users, and this is where you can invite new people to get access to your Thematic. The only thing you'll need is sort of a login email and also a name that we can identify them with. You'll also have to pick a role that you want each of the users to have, and you're able to change you're able to change someone's roles and also access at any point. So if you're not completely sure what they want to do now, which role you'd want them to be now, you can sort of pick a safer one and then possibly move them later. So the key difference is being an admin has access to all of the data sets you have. They're able to upload and download data, and they're also able to manage users like we're doing right now. An analyst has access to the data sets which they are given permission to view, and they can also download data, but they can't upload data and they can't manage other users. And viewer is the simplest one. So the viewer can go in and look at the data sets it has permission to view, which you can set here, which an admin can set, and they can't download data from Thematic and they can't upload. And so the permissions at the bottom is for different data sets, whether you want a user to have access to only specific ones. And so this is for the analytic tools and reports. And so the reports are for things like insights and dashboards. And so you can take a user which currently exists and change their permissions on the fly. So say, for example, if you wanted somebody to be able to start inviting and managing other users, you can change them to be an admin. Or if someone's already an admin, it's like, okay, I don't need you to have access to any of these. You can move them down to an analyst or a viewer. Or for example, I want you to start being able to view the insights page because I think there's value in that. You can show them that. Or no, I don't want you to have access to the dashboard anymore. You can do that as well. Now to sort of quickly go over sort of the last two things before we finish it up with sort of our plans for upcoming push reporting. So insights page is a page of curated insights put together by someone at Thematic, which try to find interesting and meaningful differences and changes in your data. Depending on the context of your data, the insights can be slightly different. For example, if you load new data every month, Thematic can make you monthly insights. So for example, June, what was the big differences between June and May? So what are changes in theme frequency? What are changes in impact scores? And so these will usually have sort of a sentence or two explaining, which can contain some more details, and also sort of a simplified graph highlighting the specific theme that's being mentioned. Another example, if you have data sets where you do sort of surveys, perhaps a survey once every quarter, a Thematic Insight page can cover insights. What's the difference between our most recent survey with our previous one? Or what are some insights about all of our surveys data put together? So the insights page can be customized to sort of what's important for you and your business context. And so one of our features that came out, gosh, probably a month or two ago, that we're definitely super happy with is dashboard. And the dashboard is sort of meant to take the most interesting parts of the analytic tools and make it much more accessible and quick to read and easy to understand. So dashboards are customizable. We can create multiple dashboards that focus on specific things. So for example, if you wanted to make a dashboard which only showed, in this particular example, only showed Delta's information, we can make a separate dashboard for you that covers just Delta's information. And then when you invite users, you could say, you're from Delta. I'd like you to just have access to this dashboard, which focuses on Delta data, or something like American, or another airline. And so a dashboard will select a time period, usually the most recent one, and then it's able to show things like the score for this particular time period, as well as what the score is compared to previous time periods. So for this one, it's last month. So for example, if we pick something like June, then we could also compare June to May. So you're also able to see the score over time. And what's especially interesting is these widgets here towards the bottom can show things like what themes are having the biggest negative impact on our score, what themes are having the most positive impact, and what themes are being most frequently mentioned, and what are their sub-themes. The other bit of interesting filtering you can do on the dashboard is we can configure and add additional filters here. So you can look at, I'd like to show me the dashboard for United in June 2017, or for American. So that way you can look at the specific, you can get the details about a specific segment, which is important. So our current feature that we're working on right now, that we're going to start trying to push out over the following month, is push reporting. And push reporting will be a system where you can customize within your thematic particular email addresses and individuals who you'd like to receive information about thematic on a regular basis. So this could be something like once a week or once a month, or every time there's a new survey added every quarter, for example. And this can contain information sort of similar to a dashboard. So not as complex as any of the analyze tools, but more of just like, here's a quick summary of some valuable things which Thematic has found. So for example, in the current week, how is score doing in this week compared to previous one? And additional information like how have themes changed from week to week? Is a theme starting to have a more positive impact or a more negative impact? Have people started mentioning a particular theme more or less? And so this is designed to make it really easy for people to get the value out of Thematic without having to go all the way into the client and dig for specific things themselves, but to get a quick sort of brief overview of meaningful changes. And then potentially, if they're interested, then they could go into Thematic themselves and find more specific details themselves. So for example, if I was really interested in June 2017, I could read the push report and see, flight timeliness has definitely had a bigger increase in negative impact. I'd like to figure out more about that myself. And so then you can go into the Thematic tool yourself and see way more specific details about it. And so we're hoping to make push reports fairly configurable for all of our customers. So that way, for example, if you are dealing with like a sales team and a customer support team, the needs of both of those teams and what sort of information you need to share with them from Thematic is going to be very different. And so that's why we want to try and make sure that whether there's a dashboard for each of them and the dashboard gets push reported to both of them, or an insights page or something like that, giving you the ability to sort of share what's the most important information from Thematic with the different members of your team, and making that available and accessible. So yeah, I think that's been a pretty good overview of some of Thematic's tools and some of the functionality. I can't see any questions right now, so I feel I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you guys next time.